Deep Space Nine wasn't the Star Trek anybody asked for. It was set on a broken-down station instead of a gleaming ship. Its captain started the series hating the franchise's most beloved character. Its creator wanted the entire 7-year run to turn out to be a black man's dream in 1953 Harlem.
Look, I understand that you're frightened, but believe me, you're better off here.
And was told no because it would have invalidated the entire Star Trek universe. 14 things you didn't know about the show that changed television. One. The ending. They wouldn't allow Ira Steven Behr had an idea for how Deep Space Nine should end. Everything. The entire 7 years, the wormhole, the Dominion War, the Prophets, all of it, had existed inside the imagination of Benny Russell. You're the black science fiction writer from 1953 Harlem who Sisko dreams himself into in Season 6's Far Beyond the Stars. The man writing about a future where a black man could be a captain, the dreamer and the dream. Behr pitched it. Paramount said no. The reason? It would have invalidated every other Star Trek series simultaneously. You cannot reveal that Deep Space Nine was a black man's dream without unraveling the entire shared universe. So Sisko steps into the wormhole. Benny Russell stays in 1953. The ending the show deserved was replaced by the ending the franchise could survive. 2. The first black lead. They nearly never let look like himself when Avery Brooks was cast as Benjamin Sisko. Paramount told him he could not shave his head. The official reason? Audiences might confuse Sisko with Hawk, Brooks's previous role in Spencer for Hire. The real reason, as studio executive Carey McCluggage eventually admitted, was more uncomfortable than that. Brooks fought it for 3 seasons. He wore the hair they wanted. He played the character they wrote. By Season 3, he had grown a goatee, and between Seasons 3 and 4, he approached Berman and Behr together, a rare alliance between 2 producers who agreed on almost nothing, and asked for the look he had wanted from the start. When Season 4 began with a shaved head and a goatee, director James Conway looked at footage of the earlier seasons and said it was like watching a different actor. Brooks told him, "I feel like a different guy." Terry Farrell was less diplomatic. "Avery wanted that look from day one," she said. "For us, the notion of the white man holding us down is not a thing, but for Avery it was. I can't even imagine what the poor man went through." 3. The captain who hated Picard on purpose. In the pilot episode, Sisko meets Jean-Luc Picard, the most beloved captain in the franchise, and makes clear he despises him. Not because of anything Picard personally did, but because Picard was assimilated by the Borg and led an attack on Federation ships that killed Sisko's wife. No other Star Trek series had opened by putting its lead character in direct opposition to the franchise's established hero. No Trek show had ever asked its audience to sit with the fact that the icon was also a source of grief. The scene unsettled longtime fans immediately. That was the point. Behr and Piller wanted Deep Space Nine to begin by making the audience uncomfortable, to establish that this show would not simply honor what came before, but would interrogate it. Picard and Sisko eventually reach an understanding, but the pilot's willingness to frame Picard as a man whose history carries real cost to other people remains one of the most quietly radical opening moves in franchise television history. 4. The show that invented prestige TV before The Sopranos, before The Wire, before Breaking Bad. Deep Space. Nine built a 7-year serialized narrative, characters who grew, choices that had consequences, wars that lasted seasons rather than resolving in an hour. At a time when syndicated science fiction was expected to reset itself every week. Showrunner Ira Behr later drew a direct line from DS9 to Game of Thrones, The Sopranos, and Mad Men. He was not wrong. The The structural innovation DS9 deployed in 1993, letting a story accumulate weight over years, letting characters be permanently changed by what happens to them, became the defining grammar of what we now call prestige television. The complication, DS9 aired on first-run syndication. If a local station skipped an episode or aired them out of order, which happened routinely, a viewer was simply lost. The show that invented binge television existed in a format that made binging impossible. Its audience found it decades late on streaming and discovered that it had been waiting. 5. The Babylon 5. Question that never went away. 2 months after Warner Brothers announced Babylon 5, a serialized science fiction series set on a space station near a wormhole, Paramount announced Deep Space Nine. J. Michael Straczynski, who created Babylon 5, had pitched a similar concept to Paramount years earlier. He never sued. He acknowledged that Berman and Piller had almost certainly never seen his material. But he also suggested publicly and carefully that Paramount executives had read his Bible and used it to steer development in a particular direction. Berman denied any knowledge of Straczynski's pitch. He said DS9 was created without awareness of Babylon 5 or anything Straczynski had submitted, what nobody disputed. Both shows launched within weeks of each other, both were set on space stations near wormholes, both featured shape-shifting characters, both told serialized stories in a medium that was almost entirely episodic. The similarity was either a remarkable coincidence or something else. Straczynski said, "If there is any winking and nudging going on, it's on the level of, okay, you know what happened and I know what happened, but let's try to be grown-up about it for now." The legal silence has held for 30 years. 6. The episode nobody nominated for an Emmy Far Beyond the Stars remains one of the most discussed and debated episodes in Star Trek history. Sisko, worn down by the Dominion War, dreams himself into 1953 Harlem as Benny Russell, a black science fiction writer whose story about a black space station commander is rejected by a magazine that believes its audience cannot relate to a black lead. Brooks directed it. He also acted in every frame of it. When the assistant director called cut at the end of Russell's breakdown scene, Brooks didn't stop. He kept going. The cast and crew watched. Nobody moved. Everyone on the production believed they had witnessed an Emmy-winning performance. The nomination never came. The crew's prop master loaned the production a real Hugo Award for a scene where a character holds one. Well, it had been won by Rick Sternbach, the show's technical designer. The actual award sat on a set representing 1953 science fiction publishing in an episode about the people the genre had historically refused to imagine as its readers. 7. The line Sisko says to camera. In the Pale Moonlight is regularly ranked the single best episode of Deep Space Nine and one of the finest hours of television science fiction has produced. Sisko speaks directly to camera throughout, a confession to a personal log, working backward through the worst thing he has ever done. He arranged the fabrication of evidence to drag the Romulans into the Dominion War. A man died to make it work. An ambassador was murdered to cover it up. The episode ends with Sisko looking into the lens and saying, "I can live with it." Then he deletes the log. The Era Bear added the final line as a deliberate reference to The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, the John Ford film about a legend built on a lie. The title came from the Batman film. The director choreographed Brooks's direct address to the camera down to the specific angle of his gaze. The episode received 4.7 million viewers, a strong number for syndication. It is the moment most often cited when people argue that DS9 was not just a good science fiction show, but a genuinely great dramatic series. 8. The writer who didn't think Sisko worked, Ira Stephen Bear, the man who eventually became the show's showrunner and its most passionate defender, initially thought Benjamin Sisko was a mistake. Bear joined the writing staff in the early seasons and found the character difficult to write and the role difficult to watch. He later said openly that SISKO's first season characterization was wrong for the guy we hired, that the character as written did not fit the specific qualities Brooks brought to the role. When Bear eventually saw Brooks in a room with Worf and the Klingons in the Season 4 premiere, the bald, goateed version who had finally been allowed to look like himself, his assessment changed completely. The key to a good performance, especially in television where you do it every day, he said, is to identify with who you're playing as a human being. The showrunner who spent years fighting for Avery Brooks had started the series unsure the character could work. The journey from one position to the other is the story of the show finding itself. 9. The Gene Roddenberry problem. Gene Roddenberry never knew what Deep Space Nine actually was. When Berman and Piller were developing the series, Roddenberry was gravely ill. Berman has said in multiple accounts that he visited Roddenberry to discuss the new project, but never had the chance to explain the premise before Roddenberry died in October 1991. Berman later said he had Roddenberry's blessing, but admitted in a January 1993 Los Angeles Times interview that he was not well at the time. He was quite ill, and I never got a chance to tell him what the ideas were. This matters because DS9 broke Roddenberry's rules. Roddenberry believed evolved humans shouldn't have persistent conflict with each other. DS9's premise required exactly that. Its characters had friction, resentment, grief, and ambition that stretched across 7 years. The franchise's utopian foundation was treated as something to test rather than something to assume. Deep Space Nine was the first Star Trek made without its creator's knowledge. It was also the one that interrogated his legacy most directly. 10. The Rifleman in Space. Brandon Tartikoff came to Berman with a specific request. Do something new, something Western, something with a father and son. His reference point was The Rifleman, a 1950s American Western about a widowed father raising his son on the frontier, navigating a lawless world through moral clarity and quiet force. Not Wagon Train, which the original series had used as its template. Something more fixed. A town. A community. People who couldn't simply move on when things got difficult. Berman took that idea and built Deep Space Nine around it. SISKO, a widower, a raising Jake alone on a battered frontier station, is Lucas McCain in the 24th century. The parallel is exact, deliberate, and almost never discussed. The show's pilot was called Emissary. It could equally have been called The Rifleman. 11. The bald head that saved the show. When Season 4 premiered, Deep Space Nine was struggling. Ratings were disappointing. Paramount brought in Michael Dorn to reprise Worf from The Next Generation, the most intimidating presence in the franchise, in an attempt to stabilize the audience. The season opened with a story about Klingon aggression. SISKO had to face down Worf, the entire Klingon Empire, and the accumulated weight of everything the Next Generation had built. He did it with a shaved head, a goatee, and 3 years of suppressed gravitas finally given room to move. The scene worked in a way nothing in the first 3 seasons had quite managed. Not because the writing was different, because Brooks was finally comfortable in his own body, in his own face, in the character Bear had always believed was possible. The bald head didn't just change SISKO, it stabilized the show. 12. The wormhole that shouldn't exist. Stable wormholes are physically impossible. A wormhole massive and consistent enough for ships to pass through would require negative mass energy, something that doesn't exist in current physics, to remain open. The production knew this. Brian Cox-level consultants were not involved, but the writers understood the problem and built it into the text. The wormhole in DS9 is explicitly not a natural phenomenon. It's maintained by the prophets, the wormhole aliens, who exist outside linear time and for whom the wormhole is an expression of something the Federation doesn't have a scientific category for. The show disguised a scientific impossibility as a theological question. The stable wormhole that drives the entire plot isn't defended by physics. It's defended by the show's willingness to say, some things in this universe operate by different rules, and whether those rules are science or faith depends entirely on where you're standing. It remains the most elegant piece of universe building in Star Trek history. 13. The Ferengi who made history Nog, played by Aaron Eisenberg, became the first Ferengi to join Starfleet in canon. This was not a throwaway character beat. It was the end of a multi-season arc that tracked a young man deciding that the culture he was born into wasn't sufficient for the life he wanted. Eisenberg died in 2019 at the age of 50, 3 years before Nog's arc was fully appreciated in the streaming era as one of the finest examples of gradual character growth in franchise television. The episode It's Only a Paper Moon, which follows Nog's PTSD after losing his leg in combat, is now widely considered one of the most honest portrayals of war trauma in science fiction. The character was a comic relief Ferengi. Then the writers listened to what Eisenberg could do. Then it became something else entirely. 14. The captain who walked into a wormhole. The series finale sent Benjamin Sisko into the wormhole. Not metaphorically, not with ambiguity about whether he survived. He told his pregnant wife he would return. He told his son goodbye. Then he stepped through and became something the show had been building toward since its first episode. A being who existed outside of linear time among the prophets, part of Bajor's theology and history, in ways that even the show itself couldn't fully map. Brooks had one condition about the ending. He insisted that the script be altered so Sisko promised to return, that he not be seen as simply abandoning Jake. The promise to his son was Brooks's line in the sand. The show that began with a man grieving his wife ended with the same man becoming something that grief and time couldn't fully contain. His final physical act was to carry a fire into a wormhole. His last words to his son were that he'd be back someday. He hasn't come back yet. The fans haven't stopped waiting. Which one gets you? The ending Ira Bear wanted and couldn't have? Avery Brooks finally being allowed to look like himself? Or Sisko looking directly into the camera and saying, "I can live with it," then deleting the log? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell. More classic genre television coming your way. See you in the next one.